Chapter 13. A few days later, Grandmom and Granddad Wycliffe drove up. The family welcomed their arrival cheerfully. Grandmom Wycliffe took one look at Holly's healthy appearance and immediately reminded Dylan that his misgivings about Holly and Aunt Hillary's private finishing school for young ladies were obviously for nothing. "She looks better than ever," she told him proudly. "Yes, Mum," said Dad meekly while he brought in their bags. Dinner conversation centered mostly around Vernon and his improved grades. "A chip off the old block," said Granddad proudly. Holly mentioned something about a cooking contest being run by the school, and did Grandmom have any old cooking books that she might borrow to look through? The answer was, "Sorry, no, dear. I threw all that old stuff out ages ago." Then Holly sang a Christmas song, which brought tears to Grandmom's eyes, rendering other questions about Holly's school unnecessary. Grandmom did suggest rather loudly that Mum find a voice teacher so Holly could continue private singing lessons during the summer. After dinner, the family settled down around the television for a night of bad home videos of their grandparents' castle trip. Vernon didn't mind, though. He had set aside a new video game for the occasion. When the lights went out, Vernon discreetly brought out his game to play. Holly seemed to enjoy this set of home movies almost as much as she did of his grandparents' video of their world trip last year. Vernon decided that was probably because Holly didn't get to see too much television. As near as he could figure out, the castle that she called school didn't have electricity, let alone a television. He noted Sasha had come out of hiding to curl up on Holly's lap. His grandparents still didn't know Holly had a cat. The next few days passed uneventfully. Holly took long walks outside while Vernon relaxed and played computer games. A Christmas tree was selected and brightly trimmed with sparkling tinsel and fake snow. Holly helped Mum with food preparations, and at quiet moments, various members of the family retreated into private corners to do last-minute gift wrapping. Finally, the big day dawned. Christmas gifts were exchanged, including 2 envelopes, one for each grandchild. Each envelope contained 2 crisp new 20-pound notes. Vernon was pleased. He already had plans on how to spend it. Vernon's grandparents left early the next morning in a rush to get home. There was a storm expected later on in the day, and they wanted to get home before it struck. Everyone waved a cheerful goodbye, and then breathed a sigh of relief when the Wycliffe car turned the corner. Holly moved up to Dylan while they watched his parents drive off. Sasha slipped out and wove happily between Holly's legs. "Where are they really going, Dad?" asked Holly, picking up Sasha with one arm. Sasha scrambled up to perch on Holly's shoulder. Sasha was a bit big for that now and had to work at keeping her balance. Dylan started to deny that his parents were headed anywhere but home, but then remembered that Holly was an empath and she probably knew his parents weren't really headed home, no matter what they or he said. "They're going to visit Aunt Marge," he finally replied. "We have an aunt, too?" inquired Holly in surprise. "Does Mum know? Maybe we should visit her sometime." "No," said Dylan. "She's a bit batty. She keeps on forgetting my name." "You mean she tends to call you Dudley instead of Dylan?" asked Holly innocently. Dylan stared. "How did you know?" "Vernon and I both know," replied Holly with a smile. "It's not like you're in the Smeltings yearbook under the name Wycliffe. I think it's sweet, by the way, that you named Vernon after your dad," she added. "I bet Granddad was really pleased about that." "Oh," said Dylan, and then added distractedly, "He was. We talked about naming you Petunia. That's Mum's real name," he added. "But your Mum thought Petunia sounded more of a nickname than a proper name, and I couldn't really explain to her why I wanted it. And then, when you were born, you were so beautiful. It was just like getting a Christmas present in the summer, so we settled on Holly instead." "I like the name Holly," replied Holly. "Speaking of gifts," she continued, "I got you another Christmas gift, but I didn't want to give it to you while your parents were here." She held out a flat package tied with a bow that had been hidden behind her back. Dylan unwrapped the present. Inside was a beautifully framed portrait of a smiling Holly. "It's of me, with long hair," added Holly. "I know how much you like my hair that way. You don't get to see it that way too often. Do you like it?" "It's beautiful," said Dylan, and he gave Holly a warm hug. "Thank you so much." The expected storm moved in after dinner. The wind howled and the house shook. Vernon could hear the hail and the sleet beat non-stop against the windows while he watched television. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the background, the tree shaking ever so slightly whenever the walls it touched rattled. "It looks like it's a big one," commented Dad calmly after the windows rattled a particularly loud time. He was reading a magazine. Sasha was curled up contentedly on his lap, purring loudly. Mom dug out the torches and got the candles and matches and set them on the coffee table in preparation of possible power outages. Vernon plugged in the battery charger for his computer game. Holly ignored the weather totally. She sat quietly in a chair with Vernon's laptop computer. She had been borrowing it a lot from Vernon lately. He didn't mind, though. Vernon had his computer games, and he knew Holly wouldn't have computer access once she returned to school. Just before 11 p.m., a bright light showed through the window, lighting the skies outside. Then there came a loud clap of thunder, and the whole house went black. A loud beeping sounded from the computer, confirming a power outage. "Darn," said Vernon in the darkness. "Now I'll never know how the program ends." "I expect you can see the rest sometime when they do reruns," said his mum casually. After a minute, a lone light switched on. Mum set the lit torch down and used its light to light a match and then a candle. "Well," said Dad, closing the magazine and getting up, his face flickering in the candlelight, "now's as good a time as any to go to bed." "Sounds good to me," said Holly quickly. She finished shutting down the computer, closed it, and turned off the annoying beep. Holly got up. She set the computer down on the coffee table and grabbed her own torch. "Good night, everyone," she said cheerfully. She hugged and kissed both Mum and Dad. Then Holly turned on the torch and headed off to her own room. Sasha followed behind. Vernon considered staying up later to play with his now fully charged game, but he decided it was rather late and he might be better off to save it for later to use the next day, should the power remain off. So Vernon got up too, grabbed his own torch, and headed off to his bedroom. A loud, persistent thwacking noise woke Vernon up some time during the night. The room was pitch black. The power was still out. Vernon staggered up and out of bed to determine its source. He finally decided a branch was blowing against his window. Cold and unable to sleep because of the noise, Vernon decided to get his computer game to pass the time. He put on his robe, grabbed his torch, and shuffled into the living room. He shined the light around the room, finally spotting his game. Vernon picked it up and turned to leave when a slight motion, just an odd flicker of a shadow, caught his attention. He swung his torch in the direction and found Holly standing still against the wall. "What on earth?" he asked, confused. "What are you doing up at this hour?" he asked her. Holly didn't answer. She didn't need to. Holly was dressed for the outdoors. She was holding a tire iron in her mittened hand, and a knotted rope was wrapped around her waist. Vernon well remembered the last time he found Holly up, when everyone else, including her, was supposed to be asleep. "You can't be going out tonight, are you?" he hissed. "In this weather? You're crazy." "It's the perfect time," argued Holly, whispering back. "The power is out, so the cameras won't be working. The dogs will be inside, and there's so much noise, no one will notice any I might make." "You can't go out there alone," insisted Vernon. "It's too dangerous." "I won't be alone. Sasha will be with me," said Holly. "Don't worry," she added confidently. "I've been out in snowstorms before." She started walking towards the kitchen. "I'll be fine. Don't wait up for me." "Stop," persisted Vernon, following her. He seized Holly's arm, stopping her, and said, "I'm not letting you go." "You can't stop me," replied Holly resolutely, shaking herself free from Vernon's grasp and resuming her walk. Sasha positioned herself between Holly and Vernon and hissed warningly at Vernon. Holly reached the back door in the kitchen and turned its handle. Okay, hissed Vernon swiftly. "Just give me a minute, will you?" Holly paused and looked at Vernon questioningly. Her hand was still on the doorknob. "I need to get my things," he added as an explanation. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I said you can't go out alone," said Vernon. "It's too dangerous. And if I can't stop you, I'm going with you." "You don't have to." "Yeah, right," argued Vernon. "Like I'm going to sit in this nice warm house waiting for your return while you freeze outside, and if you don't return, Dad'll kill me. You're my little sister, Holly. I'm supposed to take care of you. I'm coming along." He returned to his room before Holly could argue and dug his clothes out of a drawer. "I've got to be crazy," Vernon muttered to himself while he swiftly dressed for the outdoors. "She's crazy," he added while he walked back to the kitchen. Vernon was relieved to find Holly still standing by the door waiting. "Okay," he said, putting on his coat, mittens, hat, and scarf. "I'm ready. Let's go." A strong gust of wind and sleet blasted them when Holly opened the door. It chilled Vernon to the bone, causing him to freeze in his steps. Holly grabbed Vernon's hand and dragged him forward. "Hurry," she urged. "We don't have much time." Even with a torch, Vernon could barely see his feet, let alone the way in front of him. Holly shined her torchlight around, finally stopping on the gray form of Sasha. The cat was already drenched and looked like a wet blob. Sasha immediately started moving, and Holly followed. She kept the light trained on Sasha. Vernon clung tightly to Holly's hand as he struggled forward, all the while trying to keep his balance against the wind. Step after step they continued onward, while the raging wind and sleet pounded them from all sides. Flying branches and debris smashed into his face and body. Vernon lost all track of time and sense of direction. He just concentrated on keeping pace with Holly. After what seemed an eternity, there seemed to be a lull in the wind, and Holly stopped. Vernon nearly crashed into her. "What?" he shouted. "We're there," she yelled back. Vernon shined his torch ahead and looked around. Sure enough, he was standing next to a familiar tree with a tall wooden fence on either side. "Now what?" he asked. But Holly was not paying attention. She had unwrapped the knotted rope that had been around her waist. Holly handed one end of the rope to Sasha, who took it by the mouth and immediately bounded up the tree. Sasha reached the first branch, the one too high for Vernon, and dropped the rope on the other side. Using her claws, Sasha continued to pull the rope up until roughly half the rope hung on either side of the branch. Both ends of the rope were within easy grasp of Holly. Holly handed the tire iron to Vernon to hold. She reached out, grabbed the rope ends, and used them as support while she walked up the tree trunk to the top of the fence. Then she dropped the ropes for Vernon to use. Unable to back down now, Vernon handed Holly the iron. Then he grabbed the ropes and followed Holly's lead, climbing up the tree. The trunk was wet and slippery, but he finally made it. The two of them sat and rested a bit in the tree. "Look," shouted Holly. She shined her light on the camera mounted in the tree. "It's not moving. I bet it's not working." She carefully stood up, hanging onto the trunk. "I'd better be sure, though," she said, as she reached out with a tire iron and used it to push the camera about so it faced a different direction. Holly handed the iron to Vernon. Then she draped the rope on a branch that hung over the yard. Using the rope, she quickly worked her way down the tree trunk, dropping onto the ground. Vernon handed her the iron and followed. There was much less wind inside the yard, but the snow and sleet continued to fall. Holly led Vernon to the garage door. He stared dubiously at the swaying shape of a tree near the garage door that whipped back and forth in the wind. "They put in a new reinforced door with a deadbolt," Holly explained, "so I don't think we can force our way through in there. But I think we can force the garage door itself to open." On one side was a clasp and lock. Holly set her torch on the ground nearby so they could see. Then she put the iron behind the clasp, holding the lock. Vernon put his torch in his pocket and lent his weight to hers. Together the two managed to rip out the bolts, thus unlocking the door. Vernon grabbed the handle and lifted the garage door. It started to go up, then stopped after only a few inches. Try as he might, he couldn't get it up any higher. "It's stuck," he shouted. Holly added her strength, lifting from underneath, but it wouldn't open any further. "This isn't working," she finally said, stopping to examine the situation. She shined her light on the opening they had made. "It's narrow," she finally said. "Too small for you. But I think I can squeeze inside. You wait here," she directed, "and make sure the door doesn't close." Then she proceeded to force her body through the crack. After a while, Vernon heard Holly shout. "Hand me the iron," she said. "There's a chain and a lock inside." Vernon kicked the iron under the door. Soon he felt the rattle of the garage door as Holly worked inside. Then it stopped. The tire iron slid out again. "I can't do it," she announced. "It's in concrete. You just keep it open and I'll be done soon." Vernon clung tight to the handle and continued to pull upward. The door was heavy and he fought constantly against the wind that threatened to push it back down. Soon he noted several dark shapes streaming out of the garage. "Cats," he thought to himself. "I'm almost done," came a shout from within. Suddenly, Vernon heard a loud creak and a groan. Looking back and up towards the sound, he saw a huge shape coming towards him. He flung himself aside as several branches crashed down where he had stood. The tree in the yard had tipped over. Its branches pushed down on the garage door, closing it shut. "Are you okay?" screamed Holly frantically. "What happened?" Vernon pulled the torch out of his pocket and shined it towards the garage door. The door was totally obscured by tree branches. He got as close as he could to the door. "I'm fine," he shouted back, ignoring the sharp pain in his wrist and shoulder he had gotten from where he had landed. "But a tree just fell on the garage door and it's totally blocked. There's no way I can get it open. You're going to have to get out some other way. Can you open the door from the inside?" "I'll look and see," came the reply. Vernon shivered and stomped his feet in the cold while he waited for her return. After a short while, Holly called out. "No," she said, "there's no key for the deadbolt in here, and I can't get it open. This place doesn't have any tools either, just cages." Vernon looked around and picked up the tire iron. "I'm going to try the door from the outside," he shouted to Holly. He made his way around to the back door. As Holly said, it had been reinforced, but Vernon put the iron to it and tried to pry it open anyway. It wouldn't budge. He used the iron as a hammer and tried to break the door open, but that didn't work either. It only made his shoulder feel worse. Holly shouted something, but Vernon couldn't understand her. The wind was stronger on this side, and the door effectively blocked the sound. Vernon went back to the garage door. "I'm going for help," he told Holly, shouting loudly. "Where?" she yelled. "I'll get Dad," replied Vernon. "No," shouted Holly, "it's too stormy. You'd never find your way." "I'll follow Sasha," he assured her. "You can't," yelled Holly. "She's in here with me." "Well, I've got to try," he told Holly. "It's too cold. You can't stay in there all night. You'll freeze to death. And I can't stay out here either. It's find Dad or talk to the people living here. And they may just let us freeze anyway for what we've done." "You just hang on," he told her confidently. "I'll be back soon." His voice sounded more confident than he felt. It was so cold out. His shoulder and wrist throbbed painfully, and he was otherwise thoroughly numb. "No, wait!" screamed Holly. "I've got an idea. Just wait a few minutes." Reluctantly, Vernon leaned against the wall, seeking what shelter he could, while he waited, though he didn't see what that would do except lose him precious time. Suddenly he felt something bump into his legs. Looking down, he realized it was a very wet, shivering Sasha. And then he saw the light from a torch coming closer from around the house. It was Holly. "What happened?" he asked her. "How'd you get out?" "I found another way," she said briefly. "Let's get out of here." "Right," agreed Vernon. The two made their way quickly to the tree. "You first," said Holly. "You're hurt." "No, I'm not," protested Vernon. But he took the ropes in one hand anyway and accepted Holly's boost up the tree. How did she know he hurt? He hadn't said a word about it. He tossed the ends back down for Holly. She grabbed them and swiftly climbed up. Holly insisted on going down first, and then gave Vernon needed support as he lowered himself down. When Vernon was safely on the ground, Holly removed the rope from the tree and tied it around her waist. She tucked the tire iron and her torch in her makeshift belt. Then she took Vernon's torch, intending to use it for her own. "Come on," she said, shining the light on Sasha and grabbing Vernon's good hand. Vernon followed Holly's lead as they made their way back through the snow. The wind blew as much as before, and the blinding snow and sleet hadn't let up either. Vernon concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, trusting Holly would find the way. Suddenly she stopped. "What's wrong?" he shouted. "We're there," Holly shouted back, and led him through a doorway and into shelter. The silence and absence of wind and snow was deafening, and his steps echoed strangely on the floor. Didn't feel like the kitchen. "Where are we?" he asked. His voice echoed in the darkness. "The garage," replied Holly. "I had to shut the door." "Oh," said Vernon. "Why was it open?" he asked, remembering they had left from the kitchen, not the garage. "To let the cats in," she replied matter-of-factly. "They needed a place to stay during the storm. Don't worry," she added. "They'll leave as soon as the storm lets up." "Oh," replied Vernon numbly. He knew he should be objecting to this somehow, but was too cold to care. "Let's get to bed," said Holly, as she handed Vernon his torch. The two of them headed for the door connecting the garage to the kitchen, when a new voice in the darkness froze Vernon in his tracks. "Hello, Holly," the voice said calmly. Holly literally jumped at the sound. She dropped her torch, and it fell to the ground, clattering loudly. Its moving light sent eerie shadows in the garage. Vernon turned on his torch and shined it in the direction of the voice. He saw the tall figure of Cousin Harry standing to one side near the wall.